Hey, what's up YouTube? This is indiecomics back with another video. I'm going to try and do more videos this year. That's one of my New Year's resolutions, I suppose, is to try and do 4 videos a month, to try and just have more of a social media presence other than just posting, art on, DeviantArt and Reddit and complaining on Twitter. I'm trying to do a little bit more on YouTube, bringing it back. My hair is a mess, but it's okay. I've been wearing a hat all day. I decided to do a tier list. Yes, we are at the bottom of the barrel of content ideas, but I've never strived to do anything super creative with YouTube in the last several years because my focus has been on comic art. So we are doing tier list. What tier list? I'm doing a ranking of all of my comics. I said I would do this in the previous video, the review of Terror in the Trenches, and I've decided I'm going to go ahead and do that now. So I'm going to be taking all the comics I've done reviews of, and I've just got a little thing here with all the thumbnails in the smallest quality possible because YouTube is stupid. It doesn't let me copy the bigger version of the files, the bigger ones. I can't do that. I can only do the tiniest thumbnail possible. I can only copy those. And then 2 of these. So I don't have a video dedicated to reviewing ISOM 1 or ISOM 2, but I've given my thoughts on those 2 comics through several videos at this point, talking about other Rippaverse comics that I've reviewed. Oh yeah, the Gooding review. I need to get the Gooding review video. What? How could I forget? How could I forget? But yeah, basically the idea is to take all the stuff, all the videos, reviews that I've made, and put them on a tier list, rank them all beside each other, and see which ones stand on top and which ones don't. So, without further ado, I'm gonna go. I've done mostly Riververse stuff because I kind of, admittedly, the Riververse kind of got me back interested in comics as far as like reading other ones. I sort of fell off a little bit because of the state of the industry. And seeing indie comics doing well, I was like, yeah, this is pretty cool. I like this. I became more interested in it again. So that kind of kickstarted my review content as far as comics go on this channel. So I owe a lot of views to these. But I don't always look at them favorably. Obviously, I have some complaints about all of them. But for the most part, I've left, I would say fairly positive reviews about most of them. But I'm going to go ahead and start all of them, go get all the Riververse stuff out of the way and start with them in chronological order. ISOM 1, all right? I'm going to put this in B tier. And that might be controversial, I'm sure. This is probably my hottest take. Isom, I think, is probably the most interesting character in the Rippaverse for me. And that is a hot take, I'm sure. But my reasoning for it is that he's the most relatable character, I think. His motivation is simply his family and his friends. He's doing everything for them. Like, anytime they need help. Even people he's not even super familiar with, like a friend of his sister Altona's, a friend of hers is in trouble, and no, a friend of hers daughter, I think, is in trouble, and Avery's just like, okay, I'll check it out, I guess. And then it becomes personal because he gets beat up by Santuan, who's contracted by Darren Fontano, which apparently he has history with. And I find his character to be interesting, especially with, Eric July. People crap on his writing quite a bit, and I have my complaints as well. Trust me, I'll talk about him in this video. But one thing he does right, there's one thing that he does really well, it's subtlety. He doesn't tell you what his powers are, what Isom's powers or power is. And I think the subtlety is probably what makes me more interested about this character than others, because I don't know what his powers are, but I think I know. I've got a theory, and it's a theory that I've heard other people give, and I looked back at the comics, I've reread parts of it, and I was like, yeah, okay, this makes sense. I think he's a copycat, not in the way that Rogue is, that steals powers, or Parasite from DC. More so like a Mazo, to give another DC comparison. I think he copies abilities, and I think he doesn't do it immediately. I think he does it the more he's in contact, or the more he's near people with powers, he can copy them. And one of the complaints with Isom 1 is that he defeats Sanchuan, this super strong guy. He defeats him in the second match without having like a character growth or having like a change or anything. He just kind of goes in a similar fashion that he did before. And there's not a whole lot different between the first and the second encounter, but he wins. And I think if you look at it with the idea that he has to be around or touching opponents more to gain the power more so, I think it makes a lot more sense if you look at it from that standpoint, why he's able to defeat Sanchuan in the second fight. Oh yeah, spoilers for everything on here. For all the reviews I've done in the past, spoilers for everything. But yeah, I think this comic is not bad. Obviously, it's scatterbrained because it's introducing a lot of characters that don't have anything to do with the immediate plot, such as Alpha Core and Yaira. They have nothing to do with this at all. The main story of Isom, they just get thrown in here because the idea, the marketing idea, again, Eric July is more of a businessman, I believe, than a comic creator. He's business-minded, so in his mind, the best idea was to create this comic to be a launch pad for other comics. And clearly, financially, it's worked out so far. And, you know, the numbers are lower than they were 2 years ago whenever he started this out. Obviously, it's not making millions of dollars per campaign at this point. But he is still making a pretty decent amount. And at the end of the day, I think it paid off in the short term. Will it pay off in the long term? Remains to be seen. But I'm not too optimistic for it. But yeah, Isom 1, I think, was a pretty solid start. I think it was a solid start for the story. Isom 2, however, not my favorite. Not my favorite. I'm going to put it in... I'm going to throw it in D or C. D or C. Man, I'm going to put it... I'm going to put it in... I'm going to put it in C because, again, the subtlety in the writing is what makes me interested in this character. Once again, it doesn't explain the powers, how exactly they work, but it does provide more evidence of what his powers are. In Isom 1, you have no reason to suggest that his powers are anything other than mild super strength and durability. In Isom 2, it raises the question that he's a copycat because he does what the goat demon things do. He explodes with like fire around him and launches himself away when they're dogpiling him. And that supports the idea that he has to be around people with powers longer because there's so many of them dogpiling him. He's absorbing the power or copying the power so much that he bursts with energy like they do much quicker than he would whenever he was, you know, fighting Sanchuan, right? So I think that's where the theory is kind of born from, is Isom 2. I also like the subtlety of having the Projectus CEO trigger the metal detector, which is just an elevator door. You can see the button on the side. Little art error there. But yeah, there's a moment where he walks to a metal detector and it sets it off, and they're like, "Oh, you don't need to bring a gun, sir." And he's like, "Gun?" Never elaborates on it, but guess what he does? He crashes the car that this guy is trying to hijack from him in. He crashes the car on purpose, sends himself flying through the windshield. We don't see him again. I'm assuming we'll see him in Isom 3, but I can never know with Eric. But you're led to believe, but never confirmed, but you're led to theorize that he's a robot or a cyborg of some kind. And again, I like the subtlety. I like that. I like the ability to just let fans think, to let fans have, like, you know, their own theories about it in a way. I think it's made me more interested in it in the long term. By the way, these are not my thumbnails, because again, I didn't make individual videos on these two. I've just talked about them in other reviews. They're not mine, just to let you know. You could probably look up Isom review number 1 and 2 and find find the videos. But yeah, I think Isom 2, it's tough it's like, I think Isom 2 let me down a lot as far as like the content of it. I thought it was very scatterbrained, even more so than the first one. Very unfocused. But there are some aspects of it. I'll tell you what. I'll compromise and put it at the bottom of C. I'll put it at the bottom of C tier. Just because it really did not deliver on the Darren Fontano plot that the first one set up. It just it almost completely dropped it in favor of this hellish goat demons with Bloodruth. And Bloodruth is a cool character, which is another winning point in ISOM 2's case, but it delivers some backstory, which is nice, but overall, I just feel like ISOM 2 would have been better if it focused on Darren Fontano hiring Chadron, the character, the monster that caused ISOM to retire in the first place, hiring Chadron to kill ISOM or something like that. I think that would have been a better ISOM 2. Go full circle. Set up the villain that caused him to retire as a menace, as something he couldn't stop, and then bring him back. And then have it end on a cliffhanger that seems like he's going to die, or it seems like he's not going to save the day or whatever, right? I think that would have been a much better comic, especially with the trailers, the animated trailer, the first animated trailer of the Riververse, suggesting that's what it was going to be about. It had him fighting Chadron in an alleyway, not in like a super mall or wherever the flashback takes place. Even the cover that I got has him fighting Chadron, and I'm like, why? The false advertising, man, is what it feels like. So I was annoyed by that, but I'll put it at the bottom of C. I don't think it's D tier worthy. You know what? I'm putting it in D. Top of D, bottom of C, whatever. I'm putting it here. This is my final placement. I didn't think I would have so much conflict rating that one. Next up, Alpha Core. This is the first one that was like an actual standalone review video. Alpha Core, I'm going to put solidly in A. I'm going to put it second in A because I already know what's going to go in A above it. Actually, you know what? I'm going to put it middle of A because there's two I'm going to put up here. I thought Alpha Core was really good. I really enjoyed it. The story overall I thought was very well told, very well written. Chuck Dixon, I don't have to even say all the stuff he's done because he's pretty well known in the comics industry. If you know anything about the comics industry, you know who Chuck Dixon is. He did a fantastic job with the story, with these characters. I think it was fun. It was interesting. The little side plot with Ingrid and the cop with some hacking ability with his superpower, but not feeling confident enough to really go out of his way to be a hero, a named hero. He just wants to be a cop and just lay on, low profile, just use his ability every now and then. She encourages him to use his full potential, and that's what ends up saving the day whenever the Alpha Core's mobile base gets hacked and seems to be descending to the city. There's some logic things that you might pick apart. There's some moments in the comic that you might pick apart here and there for nitpicks and everything. But overall, I thought the story was great. I thought the characters were pretty interesting. They're the most heroic characters in the Riververse, just straight up. They're working for the government, but they are good intentioned characters, unlike a lot of Riververse characters. I think there's not many heroes in the Riververse, but I think the Alpha Core is basically the most heroic out of all of them. And overall, I think this comic did a good job with introducing them after their blink and you'll miss it moment in ISOM 1. And then a random scene in ISOM 2. I forgot about this. There's a random scene in ISOM 2 that has nothing to do with the rest of the book. It's just there with the Alpha Core. Did not need to be there. Anyway. Yeah, I'm putting it in D. I'm sticking with D for that. I forgot about that scene. But yeah, good book. I thought it was good. The villains were interesting as well. They were also shown in ISOM 1. Randomly had nothing to do with the plot. Like I said, Eric is a businessman. He knows what he's doing when it comes to introducing characters that people can latch onto and make more comics and stuff like that. And profits. And it worked. Short term, it worked. But But as far as actual writing, like, it's just, there's a lot of things that could be fixed about these. But yeah, so moving on from that, I don't really have a whole lot to say. From the best Rippaverse comic to the absolute worst, Yaira, this is it's very tempting to just give it an F. But there's one thing that keeps it at the very bottom of D tier. There's one thing, and that's Stefania. I think Stefania, the descendant of Yaira, who starts off, robbing a store or a bank with her friends, ends up awakening her ice powers. And Yaira sees this and tries to be family to her, but ultimately just kind of fails because she's not a good person. And it ends up turning Stefania against her, and Stefania, by the end of it, joins Alpha Corps, which I think is really cool. I think if the comic was, instead of Yaira being the main character, if it was Stefania as the main character, it would have been a much better comic, in my opinion. It would have been so much better. Still not great, but it would have been much better. Yaira as a character is not even an anti-hero. I would say she's an anti-villain. Like, she does occasional good things, but is overall bad. She, as established in the Rippaverse lore, Texas is its own country. And she blows up an oil rig. Congratulations, the economy is ruined. She doesn't care about people around her. She doesn't care about collateral damage or anything. Despite the fact that her goal as her human identity, which is a 7-foot-tall blonde lady with huge boobs, is to extend the length of human life. Why does that matter if you're so reckless that you get people around you killed just by being around you with your powers and stuff? It doesn't make any sense. It's such a huge hypocritical aspect of her character that I cannot relate to her at all, and I can't justify any of her actions, and it's why I just do not like this book. There's also just too much going on. There's too much talking. There's too many characters. It's too much going on, especially for a first volume of a series. I'm not looking forward to Yaira 2. I'm not going to get it. I didn't get Bloodruth because I felt so bad about the Soskus writing that I didn't want to read Bloodruth. Overall, I don't know. I was so disappointed by it. I was like, I'm really worried that the Rippaverse might not recover from this one. But fortunately, Gooding was a much better read, in my opinion. And I know some people will debate me on this, but I'm going to put it solidly in C tier, top of C tier. I'm going to put it here. And some people have more harsh opinions about this comic than I do. I think the bones of the story are good. And over time, my opinion has slightly worsened on this. I wouldn't necessarily rate it as high as I did in my initial review. I think I would come down a little bit. But I still feel like the bones of the story are good. I like how the characters, the main protagonist and antagonist, start in the same place. They start in school. Their lives diverge in totally opposite directions. Come back together 20 or somewhere around 20 years later. And Gooding has become the best version of himself. He's become a selfless person, doing things for the good of mankind. And Splatter, I'm not going to say his real name because Mike Barron, what were you thinking, man? Splatter is the worst version of himself. He's become the most evil and selfish person imaginable. And I love that. I love the split. I love the contrast. Heroes and villains should contrast each other in many ways, and I think it's done so well. Heroes and villains can also reflect each other, but I think it's important for them to contrast each other because it sets them apart very distinguishably. And I think for this, it works very well. The problem is the pacing. The comic is too short for how much it's trying to do. It's speeding through Gooding's life and Splatter's life, and it's just something. It just needed 30 more pages. I think it was the shortest. It may still be the shortest Rippaverse book out of all of them, and it really needed to be longer. It needed to be 100 pages, like ISOM 1 and 2. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, it was just given a short runtime, and maybe that was Mike Barron, maybe that was Eric. I don't know, but and especially with it being the first campaign comic, Instead of not campaign, the first non-campaign comic. The sales did not look very good compared to previous stuff. I think Yaira left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouth, and it reduced the sales overall. But I also think it was just the timing of it. I just think wasn't as fair. I think this comic is better than a lot of people say. I think a lot of the biggest haters are not being as honest with this book as they can be. You can not like it, that's totally fine. But I think there's a little bit of exaggeration in some of the reviews of this book that are heavily negative. I think there's a lot of good to it. I think there's a lot of things that could have been better. Like, Gooding himself is not a very relatable character. But I think the book was pretty good for what it was. For what Mike Barron was given, I think he did a pretty good job with the story. I just think it could have been paced better. And Splatterpuss, why, man? Why? Let me go ahead and I'm gonna white out all the ones I've already done so I don't get confused, even though there's not too much left. Horseman. Well, yeah, I'll go ahead and do this as the last Riververse comic. I'll go ahead and get it out of the way, and then I'll do the others. Horseman. I'm gonna put this one. Okay. Tell you what, I will move ISOM to mid B, and I will put Horseman at. I'll put Horseman at top B, and I may move it. Horseman was a pretty good comic. Again, Chuck Dixon. I just think he should just run the Riververse. I think it should be the Dixon verse, because I think he's far more consistently talented of a writer, of course, than Eric the Soskas. And I think Mike Barron is really good. I just think he was given a book that wasn't really, it's just kind of doomed to not do as good as the others. The Horseman, I think, carried a bit more sauce with him. The initial design was kind of skeptical on, but then when you see the helmet in other angles, it's like, oh yeah, the helmet looks fine. I think the design of him is pretty cool. There's some chess piece influence here throughout the book. The biggest problem with the book, I think, there's a huge art error that I cannot ignore. I have to bring it up every time I'm talking about this thing. It's so egregious. How in the world did that get past Kanan White? But anyway, the main thing with this book, I would say, as far as criticisms go, is the characters' motivations can seem a little strange. And here's the thing: it's implied that some criminals killed his brother-in-law, his sister's husband, and he's kind of been on a vengeful streak ever since. And that vengeful streak includes stealing money from the criminals to afford cost of living for himself, his sister, and his nephew. And there's some level of nobility to it, but he's definitely an anti-hero because he is just like going out and just slaughtering people and using stolen money, which was probably most definitely obtained through illegal means by stealing or by selling illegal products. There's definitely a lot of things to argue about him as a character, where he falls on the good and evil spectrum. I say he definitely leans more good. I think he's the most anti-hero out of all of these characters. He's similar to the Punisher, but goes a little bit farther with the stealing aspect of it. He leaves from up north to Texas because the heat is too high on him. He's endangering his family. So he moves them down to Texas, and immediately he's like, okay, I'm going to do one score to get us financially set for the rest of the year, and then I'm not going to put on the suit and do Horseman stuff until then. Well, he gets caught by some crooked cops, and essentially ends up getting trapped where he has to keep doing it. The premise, I like the premise. I like the motivation of the character. It's noble, but at the same time, flawed. And I think this is probably one of the most flawed characters in the Rippaverse, the most three-dimensional character, I think, as far as like the others go. Alpha Core can seem kind of flat because there's not as much moral gray to them as there is the others. They seem very like on the side of good, whereas Horseman is definitely a little more brutal with like how he goes about things. And I think the character, to me, I think he's interesting, and the book ends with him saying he's no longer going to be Horseman unless something, maybe not forever, right? And if he just comes back to being Horseman because he needs money again, I think that's going to be terrible. That's a terrible thing to do with the character. If one of his family members is blackmailed or kidnapped, I think then that would be a logical reason for him to put back on the costume. Speaking of the costume, where did he get the second one? Don't know. There's some flaws with this book, but I can't give it less than a B. I can't give it less than a B because I do think it is a fun experience. I think it's a fun reading experience. The artwork, other than that massive goof, is pretty good. The action is great. The main antagonist is a little weak, but the people he hires, I think, are more interesting than... Not interesting necessarily, but more memorable than the boss man, which he dies at the end anyway, so he was very replaceable. It ties in with Alpha Core, the story of Alpha Core, which makes it feel more connected. Alpha Core is actually vital to the plot of the story, or the plot of Alpha Core is vital to the plot of Horseman, as opposed to them just being in ISOM 1 and 2 and Yaira. They were in Gooding as well. They're kind of glued to the comics, but a lot of times their presence feels a little contrived. They do sort of show up here at the end. It's not entirely without setup because they are shown in a previous scene with a detective that may or may not have been race swapped. I don't know. Writing inconsistency there, but again, there's some flaws with it for sure, but it's not a perfect comic for sure, and I wouldn't say Alpha Core is a perfect comic. Just because it's an A tier doesn't mean it's perfect. But Horseman, I think, was overall a more enjoyable experience than I would say ISOMs or Yaira or Gooding. I would say Horseman is a better experience. And again, if I were reviewing all the comics I've read, Horseman would probably be lower. It would definitely be lower. But I'm just doing the ones I've done on the channel. So in comparison, on a scale from like A to F from what I reviewed, I would say Horseman is a B. Now let's get rid of that. Screecher. We'll do Screecher. We'll do the rest of these in reading or in upload order. I think Screecher was the next one I did that wasn't ISOM or Rippaverse related. So let's see. Screecher. I'm going to put Screecher in B. I'm going to put Screecher in B below Horseman. Because Horseman as a character, I think, was a little more three-dimensional than the main character of Screecher. Now, Screecher is not a bad comic. I always look back and I think I was too harsh on Screecher in my review. I feel like or at least I came off as a little too harsh. I had a lot of praises about it. I like the artwork. I like the story. It's a very good origin story. I think it does what it needs to do to get the rest of the comic started. The antagonist is not very flashy, at least not in this first volume, but I think it does sort of, like, the world building is set up good enough to where I can understand why this character could be a threat, and why the main character would put on the costume of Screecher in the first place to even justify putting herself in danger in the first place. I think, and I mentioned that it was very similar to Batman Beyond's pilot episodes. Very, very similar, but there were some differences. And I don't think it was a one-to-one copy. It was very similar, but it was not a one-to-one copy. And I think just because of that, I love Batman Beyond's pilot. So I do love this as a start. It feels maybe a little fast-paced Um, a little bit too fast for showing her with the gadgets and everything. Maybe a little bit more time of her using the gadgets against other criminals, perhaps, instead of just testing them in the cave. Um, Maybe a little more of that, I think, would have made this comic a little more uh, believable and well paced. Because as it is, she almost comes off as an expert right off the bat with everything. Um, I'm not gonna call her a Mary Sue. Definitely not gonna call her a Mary Sue. But she does kind of catch on to things very quickly, and I would have liked a little more time for her to develop her skills. Of course, she doesn't get out unscathed from this first comic. She does take a bullet to the leg. I think it grazes her leg, which is fine. I think that works. It shows that she's unexperienced. It shows that some stuff happens. And I do a similar thing with Little Miss Steele. She gets beat up in the first comic. She gets beat up some in the second comic. She'll get beat up in the third, fourth, fifth. She'll get beat up all the time until eventually she's become much better and easier to not get herself beat up. Let me put it that way. But yeah, Screecher was very good. I'm going to read more. I'm going to do more reviews on Screecher in the future. But overall, pretty solid. Pretty solid. Great start to a series that I'm interested in. Now let's go to Biophile Koga. This one was a highlight for me as far as the comics I reviewed. This was one of the most original ideas I've seen among the stuff I've reviewed. Definitely the most original, I would say. It's not a superhero comic. It's almost like a cosmic horror fantasy type of comic. A lot of the artwork is like gruesome in its detail. It's like it's very, very differently styled compared to everything else. And oftentimes the artwork can sometimes feel a little inconsistent. Sometimes the faces of characters look a little off. But sometimes the proportions are like that as well. And this is a thing that I've always kind of argued in favor of the Rippaverse comics, is they're pretty consistent for the most part. The characters look like the characters for the most part. In ISOM 1 and 2, especially with the promotional art, ISOM can look very different from thing to thing. I mean, my favorite example is this bookmark with ISOM that just... I'm sorry. That he does not look like he does in the comics at all. But, in the actual comics, he does look fairly consistent, right? And Alpha Core looks pretty consistent. The Horseman looks pretty consistent. And that's like my main argument in favor of the Rippaverse comics, is that they're pretty consistent with the artwork quality for the most part. There are some things like Yaira. Overall, people will seem to agree that Yaira's art quality was not as high as the others. Still not bad. I wouldn't say it's bad by any means. But for the most part, the Rippaverse comics, I would say, are pretty consistent. Whereas these two are a much smaller team working on it. Screecher and Koga, much smaller team working on it. And, not to say that it's bad, but there is a difference. There is a difference in the overall consistency of some things. Again, I think they both look great. I think Screecher has a more cartoony art style to it. I think it looks good. I think Biophile Koga has a very unique art style to it. I can't really pin one thing that it makes me think of whenever I look at it. It does have its own very unique look to it. And the storytelling was really interesting. It was a longer read. It had just had a lot of really cool ideas for the characters' abilities and the world building and everything. There's just so much to pull apart from this. I want to go back and read it again because I feel like there's a lot of stuff that over time I've forgotten that I'm like, wow, this is really cool, that I could just like refresh my memory of it again. But it is overall a very solid read. It's a great comic. Support them. They're trying to set up their own universe and stuff. I think I saw yesterday or maybe today a post from the Godfo Universe Twitter account saying that they've got like another one that's being funded, which is set in the same universe. So it's I mean, there's a lot of potential for this. I think this is probably one of the most original comics I've read. I think it's very much detached from anything else in the genre that I've read so far. Everything else is superhero stuff, but this is very much different. And last but not least, we've got Terror in the Trenches, Volume 1. And this is going straight to the top of A tier. I know if Vonster is watching this video, I know you're just like, yes, 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 because it's higher than all the Riververse stuff. I know you be honest, did you jump out of your chair? Did you or did you not jump out of your chair when I said that? Anyway, this comic is very good. And I don't think this is recency bias. This is not recency bias talking here about the quality of this comic. I think the artwork is going to be subjective to different people, like different styles. I love this style of artwork. The quality is so good. The detail of it is great. The character writing is really cool. The world building is really cool. It is a great start to a comic series. It has a great cliffhanger, great introduction of the antagonist. Everything feels very natural. There's a few critiques that I made in the review, such as some repetitive inner monologue from the main character, Black Terror. The Deus Ex Machina appearance of the character Lady Satan, which I felt could have been potentially set up in a flashback, explaining why she's there in New York with him, but not like really being all that close to him. It seems like they know each other, but they're not like super close, like talking on the weekly basis or something like that. I would have just liked to have an explanation of why she's here now of all times. Has she been here forever, or has she been in New York for a long time? Maybe have her at least appear, if you're not going to explain all that, at least had her appear in like a flashback with Black Terror in the 40s. But those minor complaints aside, I thought the comic was an excellent start. I thought it was an excellent start to a series, and the characters, like I said, all the characters introduced are really cool, really unique. It is superhero-like. It is superhero similar, of course, because they're characters with extraordinary abilities and stuff like that. It's similar to like that, but it's a different premise because it's not set like, in modern day. It's set in the 70s. So there's a little bit of differences with some of the technology, with some of the appearance of like, the neighborhoods and some of the technology and stuff like that. It's different looking. And I guess I'll go ahead and say this right now. The Riververse characters with their abilities and stuff have not been very unique. And that's not necessarily a huge issue, but it will dock some points from their comics compared to something like Kolga, especially, or Terror in the Trenches, because all the characters in this have some pretty unique powers. Maybe they're not totally original, right? But they're not super common. Black Terror has super strength and durability. Maybe not the likes of Superman, but he has some level of super strength and durability, similar to like Brian Solari and Braxwell from the Alpha Corps. But the method of it, the method of how it takes place is different. Black Terror has to inhale this gas, the galaxy gas. He's huffing it, and then it's giving him these powers for a certain amount of time. Eventually, it'll wear off. Whereas Brian Solari is just basically a Superman clone. And the same thing can be said for Braxwell. It seems like these two have like almost identical powers, and maybe they have some differences. But as of all these comics where they've appeared in, I have yet to see anything suggesting that they're not just the same person. And even, Ingrid, she's got the whip. But that I would say that's more unique than the other two. But to have two characters on the same team have effectively the same power set, flight, super strength, durability. Only Braxwell likes to use bazookas and stuff like that with it, which is cool. But again, it feels very like carbon copy superhero like. Horseman doesn't have any powers. Instead, he's kind of like Batman or Punisher, more like Punisher, I would say. Isom, again, Isom, I would say, is the most interesting Rippaverse character. Hot take, hot take. Gooding, he's kind of like Iron Man, right? He's sort of like Iron Man with his abilities and stuff. And I've written a character that's like Iron Man. So, I'm not immune to the criticism as well. But, Yaira is a little more interesting. She's basically Superman with ice powers, which Superman has ice powers, technically, with his breath. Hers is definitely more like, Iceman or something like that. Frozone! And, I think there's, again, I don't think necessarily having characters with powers that we've seen in other comics before is a bad idea. The Black Terror has the fear gas from Scarecrow from the Batman comics. So, again, not 100% original either. But it's the combination of things. It's a combination of the fear gas plus the fact that it gives him inhuman strength and durability. It's the fact that the Celeste Sarkov has these guns on her heels and pistols in her hands, with the ability to use some type of blood magic, right? It's the combination of elements that you don't usually see that make them more interesting. And I think that's what causes this, among other things, to edge out, Alpha Core. Because I sing the praises of Alpha Core often. But I do think when you look at the characters, they're a bit more generic. They're a bit less in-depth. They're a bit less three-dimensional than the characters in Terror in the Trenches so far. And maybe Udo Reverse pulls up. Maybe Vonster completely falls off and writes a terrible volume 2 and 3 and 4, and then Alpha Core is the greatest thing ever. I don't think that's going to be the case, but I'm just saying, like, for now, this is my tier list, and this is where everything sits. So, Vonster, have a drink, celebrate. And Chuck Dixon celebrate, because you're beating both Chuck Dixon comics are better than the rest of the Rippaverse easily, in my opinion. Screecher, have a drink as well, great comic. Koga, Biofile Koga, drink up, but not too much. But this is my tier list. Nothing I would say is absolutely F, though Yaira is certainly close. Like I said, the only redeeming quality of that is Stefania's character. And that's merely based off of potential. It was very repetitive in dialogue. Action scenes weren't very great. There's too many characters. There's just so many problems with this. It's just barely not an F. And if I eventually get like my hands on a secondhand copy of like Yaira 2 from like someone else who reads it and decides they hate it and want to get rid of it for like $5, I would buy it and then do a review of it. Same thing with Blood Ruth. I'll look for cheap resales of it, but I'm not going to buy those comics from Rippaverse. Even if they are only $13, which is a welcome price drop from $35 from ISOM 1 and 2. But with all that being said, this video has gone long enough. Thanks so much for watching. Check out Little Miss Steel 2. I'm officially halfway done with Volume 3. So look forward to that in March. I'm ahead of schedule, so if I keep up this pace, I might be able to release it early March, but I'm not going to promise that. I'm just going to say March. Hold me accountable. But yeah, thanks for watching. Thanks for all the creators who watch these reviews and share them as well. I appreciate it. And until next time, peace out.